Welcome everybody, and thanks for coming in today. My name is Josh Asowak. I'm a senior staff attorney at the Alaska Native Justice Center in our Tribal Services Department. Also joining me today is Adrian LeCourneau. I'll let him introduce himself.
Good afternoon, everybody. I'm Adrian LeCourneau. I am the Tribal Justice Facilitator here at ANVSA, and we hope to have a good presentation.
We've got a couple of housekeeping notes before we get started here. First is that this presentation is being recorded. You should have gotten a little pop-up to let you know that, and this is to make sure that it's available in the future. People want to watch it who weren't able to make it today. The second thing that we want to mention is we want to give a big shout out to OVW and the Department of Justice for funding this presentation. We really appreciate the funding and the support for the community that goes on there. Again, a couple other things. The first thing that we're going to ask you to do is, if you are comfortable with technology and using the chat function, we've got a few too many people to do individual introductions here. But if you want to drop your name and the tribe or organization that you're affiliated with and what your role is in the chat as a means of introduction, that would be great. We always like to ask some people to put something in there. So if you've got, say, a favorite salmon recipe, we'll do that. It's fall time. So if you want to put whatever your favorite salmon recipe is in the chat as well, maybe we can get some recipes today. Just because of the number of people that we're anticipating at the presentation today, we're going to ask that if you do have questions and you're comfortable with the chat, that you drop them into the chat, and then we will take them as they come up. We'll also have a couple of places where we'll stop and ask for questions if people have questions that they'd rather ask directly rather than put in the chat. There is a little raise your hand feature where if you click on the little raise hand, your hand will pop up. If you've got a question that you want to ask in person, just go ahead and raise your hand. And like I said, when we get to the point for questions, we'll run through all of those. Yeah, and Alyssa and Kayla, who are a couple other of our ANJC employees, will be keeping an eye on the chat. So if you've got any other questions or anything else that comes up, go ahead and drop it in there. Otherwise, we will go ahead and get started. And we are here today talking about tribal jurisdiction and native villages after VAWA 2022. All right, next slide, please. So there are three key points that we're going to cover, and this is, again, just kind of a broad overview of what the presentation is going to be about. The first is reaffirmation of the tribes have their own jurisdiction over their own citizens, which was a holding from John V. Baker. The second is that the Violence Against Women Reauthorization Act of 2022, which you will hear us refer to throughout the presentation as VAWA 2022, clarifies and extends the jurisdiction of tribes over all natives in the village. Third thing that we're going to talk about is that VAWA 2022 also creates a pathway for tribes to exercise special tribal criminal jurisdiction over non-natives in the village. Next slide, please. First, a little bit of history about tribal criminal jurisdiction. And like all good court cases, this particular bit of history started with a party. There was a couple of gentlemen who were non-Indian residents of the Port Madison Reservation. And there was a couple of things that happened in sequence in the early 1970s regarding these gentlemen. Two people in question were named Mark David Oliphant and Daniel Belgrade. The first thing that happened in 1973 was that the tribe adopted a law and order code that not only applied to its tribal citizens, but all residents of the Port Madison Reservation. Second thing that happened was there was a party, and Mr. Oliphant and Mr. Belgrade got a little bit out of control of the party and took what we consider to be some criminal actions, including assaulting the tribal police officers who attempted to arrest them for their disorderly conduct. Under the law and order code, that the Port Madison Reservation had adopted. This led to a lot of litigation. And next slide, please. In 1978, the U.S. Supreme Court set out an opinion known as Oliphant versus Squamish, which said that the tribes have no inherent sovereign power to exercise criminal jurisdiction over non-Indians, or at least this was the holding that the Supreme Court adopted in that case. When VAWA 2013 was initially passed, there was language in there that changed this, sort of, but there were some restrictions that made it difficult for Alaska tribes to be able to apply it to themselves. Next slide, please. One of the reasons for this restriction, and one of the big things we'll talk about when we talk about VAWA 2022, was that tribal jurisdiction oftentimes was tied to this idea of Indian country or Indian land. And this is something that works very, very well in a lot of the outside situations with the lower 48 Indian tribes, but it has very limited impact in Alaska. And one of the things that's true about both Alaska and about the tribal lands in Alaska is that there's a lot of history and a lot of different things that have happened and have affected the reason that Alaska is different from the lower 48 in the way that we approach the land and jurisdictional issues related to that. Okay, before I move on to the next section where we're talking about some of that history, I wanted to stop here and see if there's any initial questions. I don't see any that we have, but want to just double check to see if there's questions here at the beginning of the presentation. All right, well, with that, we'll delve a little bit deeper into some of the history.
So if we were to delve into the history of tribal jurisdiction within Alaska, we can spend an entire semester on tribal jurisdiction. Even this 11 here are core to the tribal jurisdiction. Let's reduce that down to 7. So the 7 we'll talk about is tribes as First Nations, first political communities within the state. Are organized and they are self-contained political communities. If we flash forward to 1953, we have PL 280 comes into effect, and the state of Alaska entered into PL 280 a little bit later in 1958, but that changed from a federal jurisdiction to a state. So that right there complicates the tribal jurisdiction within Alaska. Adding on top of that, we have ANVSA. So ANVSA, in the statutory language, it revokes the reservations and also extinguishes Aboriginal title. So that changes the fundamental look of what jurisdiction looks like in Alaska. The next two aren't particularly directly affecting on tribal jurisdiction, but they have impact, as you shall see. The Indian Self-Determination and Education Act is the provided a framework for governments to act as governments, to take up tribal programs, and including policing. The List Act created a way that the federal government can recognize tribes as a formalized process, and within the state, there's 229 tribes, 229 jurisdictions. And then that brings us to Alaska v. Piatai. So in 1998, this case came before the U.S. Supreme Court, and the central question that need to be asked is what does the jurisdictional area of Alaska tribes look like? On one hand, you have PL 280, you have ANVSA, which reduce the size and scope of tribal jurisdiction. Then on the other hand, you have ISD, and you have the List Act, which affirm that tribes do exist, that there are governing bodies in the state of Alaska. So with phenotype, the U.S. Supreme Court says there are tribes, but the land jurisdiction does not exist in the same way it does in the lower 48, which set up the next case, which is John V. Baker.
Like Adrian said, there's a lot of history behind a lot of these, and if we really wanted to, we could probably easily do an hour on each node on that timeline. So we're going to very briefly touch on John V. Baker, and the two things that we really want to emphasize from this specific one as it relates to this presentation is there's two things that John V. Baker really affirmed and upheld. The first was that there is, in fact, inherent tribal sovereignty that exists for the Alaska Native tribes in the same way that the lower 48 tribes have been granted sovereignty. The second is that the tribal jurisdiction over its citizens is not necessarily dependent on boundaries, that the jurisdiction can extend beyond the specific boundaries that have existed. Next slide, please. So that brings us up to 2022, when the Violence Against Women Act was reauthorized, and there were some changes that were incorporated into the 2022 amendments in the Violence Against Women, into VAWA 2022 that we want to go over here. The first of those, and this is an expansion beyond what John V. Baker said, was that Alaska tribes' inherent authority to exercise civil and criminal jurisdiction extends to all Native people within the tribe's village. This is an expansion, and that is it expanding beyond just that tribe's tribal citizens to all Natives who are residing within the village. Second thing that VAWA 2022 did was recognize Alaska tribes' civil authority to issue and enforce protective orders against all people for matters arising within the village or otherwise within the tribe's authority. The third thing that VAWA covered was that it created the Alaska Pilot Program, which is a pathway for tribes to criminalize jurisdiction over non-Native people who commit certain crimes within the village. Again, this is something that leads to an expansion of the tribe's jurisdiction beyond just its tribal citizens to cover non-Native people who are committing crimes within the village. And finally, and probably most relevant for what we're talking about today, is that for the first time, there was a definition of the territory within which a tribe in Alaska can exercise its inherent authority over all Native people. One of the logistical things that was made very, very difficult by the lack of Indian country and reservations and other things where there is a bright line on a map that indicates who is in control of this territory was that there was no territorial boundaries or no territorial borders that you could point to and say, this is the area within which the tribe is able to exercise its jurisdiction. This is the territory where this jurisdiction can be exercised. And VAWA 2022, for the first time, came up with a solution in order to define what those territories are that we're going to talk about in just a moment here. But again, I want to stop and see if there's any questions before we jump into how VAWA defines those territories where a tribe can exercise jurisdiction. Gloria, I see we have a hand raised. unmute Gloria and see
Oh.
what the question is. Yeah.
I'm just wondering how come they didn't consult with the tribes about the boundaries.
We're going to talk about that over the next several slides. So Adrian, do you want to take us to the next slide, and we will talk about what it is that went on in that process, right? So the first thing that we're going to see is the definition of village. And what VAWA said about the village is that the term village means the Alaska Native Village Statistical Area, or ANVSA, covering all or any portion of a native village as it was defined in ANVSA, as that is depicted on the applicable tribal statistic area program verification map of the Bureau of the Census. That sounds like a lot of government terms stuck together. It very much is. So we have a new term here, which is an Alaska Native Village Statistical Area, or ANVSA. We have a list of native villages as recognized by the Alaska Native Claims Settlement Act, ANVSA. And then we have the government department who is responsible for this, which is the Bureau of the Census. And the purpose for this, and I think the reason that they adopted these census maps for this, is that they wanted to have something that they could put in place immediately that was already existing and have that geographic determination. But this definition can be used by tribes immediately for determining the geographic area within which the tribe can exercise its authority, inherent authority over all Native people. Next slide, please.
So what exactly is a Alaska Native Statistical Area? It's a line on the map that's drawn by the U.S. Census Bureau for statistical purposes. So they're looking to draw this map for political expediency. They're looking to fund programs. They're looking to get an understanding of that area which they draw the line on the map. So it is firstly, it's just a place on the map they can examine. There is no land ownership with the ANVSA. Creating these ANVSAs, the U.S. Census Bureau has a process. They start 2 years prior to the census. It's a long and complicated process. Tribes are consulted during the drawing of the maps. If the tribe does not respond, they will reach out to the regional corporation to verify that the lines do in fact encompass a village. So like Josh was saying, that these lines on the map are used by VAWA to clarify jurisdiction. They're not Indian country. They provide an area for which this pilot program can operate. So stepping a little bit back to John B. Baker. So where we have John V. Baker being a civil jurisdiction over the citizens is based on inherent tribal sovereignty. It applies to all tribes in Alaska can use John V. Baker to exercise its jurisdiction, and that exercise range is based on citizenship. VAWA 22 adds on civil and criminal jurisdiction. It's based on the ANVSA. So again, the lines that are drawn by the U.S. Census Bureau, and it is both based on the inherent sovereignty over all natives within the territory, or federal statute for non-natives for certain crimes. VAWA 22 has a 3-part test, which we'll cover in a little bit. And this is all within VAWA 22, just applies within the ANVSA. So what are we talking about when we're talking about ANVSAs? There are 221 ANVSAs. There are 229 tribes. Not all tribes have ANVSAs. Some are going to be sharing ANVSAs. Some, like Clink and Haida, do not have a territory associated with them. There are a couple ANVSAs where there are no federally recognized tribe. However, the ANVSA does exist. The total land area covered by ANVSAs is about the size of West Virginia. It has the same jurisdictional footprint, very close to the Navajo Nation. Our largest ANVSA is Knik at over 7,000 square miles, and smallest at Heidelberg at under a square mile. The average ANVSA ranges about 24 square miles. And the thing about ANVSAs is that it's there's a census process for changing the size of the ANVSA. Again, there are recommendations that the Census Bureau follows when drawing the ANVSA. And I believe that should be in the chat. 40% of the state's population falls within an ANVSA, and that's a interesting fact, because of the only places that do not fall within that are Anchorage, Fairbanks, Juneau, and Kodiak City proper. Majority of populated area in Alaska otherwise is within an ANVSA. And the size can be changed. Like I said, for example, Knik at one point was just over, I believe, 5 square miles, and it changed its ANVSA size sometime in the 90s. So how do you find your ANVSA? If you happen to have an iPhone, you pull up your Maps program and look at your community. You will see the outline around your community in black usually, or if you go to the maps.apple.com website, you can see it that way too. Those are the easiest ways to see your ANVSA. Otherwise, I would highly suggest that if you're going to use it for your council, I would go to the census website, highlighted here. This is the official US Census map. And if you Google for this, you might end up in the 2010 census maps. Use the 2020 maps because there are changes. There are differences between the 2020 and the 2010s. Census might have changed the lines here or there. And for your more technical folks, there are ArcGIS for your planning purposes.
So,
questions?
I was going to say, Gloria, just to kind of wrap back around to your question and close that out. The short answer is that the Bureau of Census generally reaches out to tribes to work with them on their ANVSAs when we're looking at an upcoming census, which is every 10 years. But because this is the first time that ANVSAs have been used for that, we're not sure how much time or effort or energy tribes have previously put into working with the Bureau of Census on that. So that is, again, it is may be different than the usual federal departments that we're working with, but if you want to work on the specifics of your ANVSA, the Bureau of Census is the agency that makes the determination as to those updates. And Adrian, remind me, those get updated every 10 years, is that right?
Every 10 years they start, usually 2 years prior, and you should be getting an email from the Participant Survey Assessment Program, PSAP, from the US Census.
Yeah, so that should be coming up in the next couple of years. So if you look at your ANVSA and you think that it needs to be updated ahead of that, then our recommendation is to talk to that specific office within the Bureau of Census, as they're the ones who have control over those changes. Okay, were there any other questions before we go on to the next portion of things? We have a question from the Native Village of Wales. I don't know if this is Gloria. Did you have a follow-up question?
Yeah, I was wondering who could help the tribes do this if we need help.
So we will. I'll save the larger sales pitch for our services at the end of it. But if you have, if you want technical assistance around tribal justice matters, this is one of the reasons that ANJC exists. One of the programs that we have is training and technical assistance for tribes when it comes to tribal court and other things that fall under tribal jurisdiction. So if your tribe wants assistance with this, you're welcome to reach out to ANJC, and we will help point you in the right direction as far as that goes. Like I said, I believe that the maps for the ANVSAs don't get updated for the next couple of years, but you can have specific discussions with us in a separate meeting if you want to talk about your specific area that we're looking at. We had again, this is a comment. I'm going to address this briefly. From the Native Village of Wales, it says Alaska State Troopers do not recognize VAWA. Without getting into any specific situation, as we don't really want to talk about the specifics of each case, one of the things that I would note is that there is a registration process for registering tribal court orders with the state of Alaska. And one of the things, especially if you are trying to get the Alaska State Troopers to recognize orders, valid orders that have been issued by the tribal court, is that is oftentimes much easier to do if that tribal court order has already been registered with the state of Alaska. And if you have questions specifically about how to register orders, tribal court orders with the state of Alaska, and how to make sure that they are getting enforced after they have been registered, again, this is one of the services that ANJC can assist with, so please reach out to us. So we've gone over the changes to VAWA 2022, and we've gone over the existence of ANVSAs and where they came from and how those get updated. So this is where this leaves us, right? We have as affirmed by VAWA 22, that tribes have inherent jurisdiction over the citizens wherever they are. And that, again, is part of that inherent tribal sovereignty and the jurisdiction that comes along with us, as is outlined by John V. Baker. It also affirms that tribes have civil and criminal jurisdiction over all natives in its ANVSA. And again, this is an expansion of that jurisdiction from John V. Baker, as one of the things that John V. Baker is talking about is jurisdiction over the tribal citizens. Well, there are a lot of places in Alaska where there are a lot of villages close together where the people who are living in that village may be native but may not be tribal citizens for that tribe. What VAWA 2022 is saying is that that tribe's civil and criminal jurisdiction extends to all natives, regardless of where that specific tribal citizenship lies within the ANVSA. VAWA 2022 also affirms that a tribe may issue a civil protective order against anyone in the ANVSA or otherwise under the tribe's authority. And again, when we talk about getting other, particularly courts and law enforcement agencies, to recognize those protective orders, there is a specific process that tribes can go through where they can register their tribal protective orders with the state court so that there is a legal authority that the other, particularly law enforcement officers, have when they're looking at that, because there is a state court case number that is now attached to that tribal court order. The other thing that VAWA 2022 adds is the additional special tribal criminal jurisdiction over all people within a tribe's ANVSA for tribes who meet the criteria and receive the designation from the Attorney General. We'll talk a little bit more about that special tribal criminal jurisdiction. This is a quote directly from the United States Code as it relates to the special tribal criminal jurisdiction, in which it says that Alaska tribes that meet certain standards to protect defendants' rights can exercise special tribal criminal jurisdiction over certain crimes committed in their villages by non-Indian perpetrators. And what this is a pathway forward for criminal jurisdiction over non-Indians within those tribal ANVSAs. So if we go back all the way to that unruly party in 1973, where you have tribal police enforcing a tribal code on tribal land, but the people that they are attempting to enforce it against are non-Indian perpetrators. This is a situation that is directly addressing that issue of the lack of jurisdiction over those non-Indians on what is otherwise considered to be tribal land. Next slide, please. There is jurisdiction over certain crimes. And again, this is 25 U.S.C. section 1304A5. The extended jurisdiction within those ANVSAs covers the following crimes: assault of tribal justice personnel, child violence, dating violence, domestic violence, obstruction of justice, sexual violence, sex trafficking, stalking, and violation of a protective order. Next crime. Next crime. Next slide, please. The actual amendments to establish a special tribal jurisdiction exist within the Indian Civil Rights Act, or ICRA, as it's called. This is a portion of federal law that extends certain rights that exist under the Bill of Rights to defendants in tribal court cases. And what it's basically saying is that there is a certain minimum amount of due process that tribes owe to criminal defendants if they are getting prosecuted for criminal cases in tribal courts. These amendments very, very closely mirror the requirements for due process that the federal government pushes onto states. So a lot of the same things that you'll see in criminal state court prosecutions that the courts are required to provide to those criminal defendants. The Indian Civil Rights Act also extended those to tribal matters.
So if your tribe is interested in participating in the pilot program, there's a couple questions your tribe needs to ask. First is, does your tribe meet the criteria? Does your tribe have an ANVSA? So you need that area that's defined to exercise jurisdiction. Your tribe needs to be on a federally recognized tribe. It needs to have the ability to have that jurisdiction. And then your tribe also needs to have be listed in ANVSA because it needs to have the land base to fulfill all its obligations. The next thing your tribe needs to decide is it going to go in as a individual or is it going to go in as a consortium? The tribe can enter into the pilot program as an individual tribe or as a consortium. And then it's got to decide which track it's going to be a part of. In all the tracks, you will need to submit a letter of interest and then complete a questionnaire. It's on the Department of Justice website, listed here on your screen. I highly, highly suggest that if you're interested, please visit the website. Track 1 is your tribe has some interest in participating. So you submit the letter, answer the questionnaire. Your tribe will be assigned a federal liaison, and they will help you through the rest of the process. Second is a preliminary pilot program tribe. This is a track 2 tribe. And this is for tribes who are want to go a little bit further investigating the possibility of being a pilot program designee. So you will again submit the letter, get the questionnaire. You will get a federal project liaison, and you will also be assigned a technical assistant provider. And this will help you refine your goals and work towards your readiness to exercise special tribal criminal jurisdiction. And then there's track 3 is for tribes who think they're ready. Again, you will submit the letter, submit the questionnaire. Your federal liaison will review your package. They will discuss the Attorney General designation, and will either make a recommendation that you maintain your current status, or if you're coming straight from not participating, I recommend that you participate. Or if your designation is approved, the federal liaison will develop a plan to work with the tribe.
All right. And like we said, if you have any questions about that, or if you specifically want training and technical assistance on tribal justice matters, please feel free to reach out to ANJC, and some of our tribal folks will be happy to sit down and go over the process in a little bit more detail. Just to summarize, actually, before we get to this, I have one very important note on here. We do have a participation survey where Alyssa is going to drop that link into the chat. Please let us know how you did, if you like the program, if you want to see more, I think there's improvements that we can make. And we really appreciate it if you can fill out that survey so we can get feedback. Number one thing we're always trying to do with our presentations is make sure that we're making them as informative as possible for the people that set aside time to meet with us. So we're gonna go ahead and put that in there. Again, a couple reminders about this. Tribes already have jurisdiction over their citizens. VAWA 2022 uses the ANVSAs to clarify and extend the jurisdiction of tribes over all natives within the ANVSA. VAWA 2022 also creates a pathway for tribes to explore exercising special tribal criminal jurisdiction over non-natives through the Alaska Pilot Program. All right, I want to see if we have any final questions before we wrap it up. Gloria, did you have another question?
Yeah, a few tribes in Alaska have gotten through Alaska Native Settlement Act or other ways of getting acquired lands for their tribe. I was wondering what your thoughts are about that being included. Do you think it will be likely that it could be included in this ANVSA?
I'll let Adrian go. Adrian, do you wanna jump on that before I respond?
Sure. So it's not exactly tied to ANVSA. It's so the ANVSAs don't necessarily follow the same boundaries as, say, where your village corporation or your regional corporation are. Some ANVSAs are almost entirely within state lands. So it's not necessarily tied to ANVSA. What the ANVSA part is it allows, it kind of goes back to the statistical part of the equation, is that if you're in there, then U.S. Census will assume that you're a tribe and create a boundary.
And what I would say to that is it kind of depends on which jurisdiction that we're talking about, because one of the things that's different about the John V. Baker and the VAWA 2022 jurisdiction is that when we're talking about something where you're talking about tribal jurisdiction over citizens or its land. That's something that's really falling into the John V. Baker context and the borders that are there. What VAWA 2022 is saying is it doesn't necessarily change ownership or control of the land, but that there needed to be some type of way of determining a boundaries on a map that didn't exist. And the best tool that they had among all the different tools that they had for something that could be implemented immediately was the ANVSAs, right? Was the Alaska Native Village Statistical Areas. So it doesn't necessarily change any of the ownership related to the land in the ANVSA. It's just that this is the map that they're using to measure the boundaries of that area where that tribal jurisdiction extends. Yeah, did you have another question, Gloria?
Yes, I was asking about that, but my second question is what about acquired land? Because tribes in Alaska have applied for from their ANVSA as well as bought land, purchased land, and are they gonna be acceptable to including that as part of their ANVSA?
So when we're talking about VAWA 2022, what it's saying is that it's the measurement for that jurisdiction is whatever the ANVSA is, right? So it's whatever that area. If there was some question about land that was purchased outside of an ANVSA, I think that would be one where that question would be litigated. So for example, if you had a village that bought a building in the middle of Anchorage, that is a different question than if you're talking about a land that is adjacent to that. But that's one where we would really have to know specifically what it is that is making the tribe want to exercise jurisdiction outside of that ANVSA, right? And that question of that is, and how that comes about. Again, it's one of those things where you would have to look at where that property is that was purchased, and then where the borders of that ANVSA was. And if you think that the ANVSA needs to be expanded to recognize all of the places where the tribe generally would consider to be within their jurisdiction, then the way to get that updated is to work with the Census Bureau on updating your ANVSA for that upcoming census. I don't know the answer to if there was a crime committed on tribal land outside of that ANVSA, whether or not it would be considered to be that. That would be something that we would have to do a little bit more research in, and would ultimately probably end up getting litigated if it was clear that the tribal land that had been purchased was outside of the ANVSA, because you have two different legal definitions that are then competing. Any other questions? All right. Again, we're a little bit ahead of schedule, but that's not the worst thing in the world for a lunch meeting. I want to once again give a big thank you to our funders for this program. Again, this is OVW within the Department of Justice. And if you have any questions about any of these things or want to get into it on a little bit more specific detail for things that your tribe specifically is concerned about, please feel free to reach out to ANJC. You can email us at tribaljustice@anjc.net, and we will set up a time to sit down and talk with you about whatever your issues are. Again, I believe the survey link is already in the chat. Please fill out those surveys so we can get the information to our funders about whether or not this program was useful or how we can improve it for the future. We will stay online. If anybody has any additional questions or anything else that they would like to ask us about, we'll be around till 1. But otherwise, I think that this wraps up our presentation. So if folks have additional questions or comments or things that they want to ask us about, again, we'll be here for another 10 minutes or so. But otherwise, you are welcome to drop off the line. And we really appreciate everybody spending some time today with us and going over this material.